Boker Tov, Seacrest friends, and hi there from Rabbi Leah. How are you? Good to see you again this Tuesday morning. Gorgeous day outside, not too hot, not too cool. Kind of like the porridge in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, just right. I'm feeling especially proud this morning because, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but there is a rabbinic expression that says, Kol Yehudim Aravim Zeh Lezeh, which means all Jews are responsible one for the other. And it is an expression that I think rings very, very true. So that when we as Jews, for those of us who are Jews, see somebody of our own faith tradition succeed at something and create something marvelous or excel in a particular sport or science area of science or medicine, we're very, very proud. Similarly, we hold communal responsibility for those who are Jewish when something bad happens and we feel a communal sense of shame or regret or sadness. And this is particularly true in situations, for example, Bernie Madoff, Michael Milken, um, Michael Cohen, when we see these unfortunate situations arise where we feel that those people who are members of our tradition, our religion, are behaving badly. And we certainly feel the guilt and the shame of that. And it's because Judaism is a communal religion. And we know that specifically when we are engaged in prayer, and particularly, for example, on Yom Kippur, because many of the prayers that we recite are done in plural fashion. So, al chet shechatanu, we forgive us, pardon us. And so Jews realize that the behavior of one reflects on the behavior of many. And throughout Jewish history, this has been particularly critical because many other peoples have used one Jew behaving badly as an excuse or a rationale to scapegoat all of Judaism. Not that anyone's ever needed a rationale because it's happened throughout history for thousands of years, but when somebody is very does something that's really dishonorable and it reflects badly on all Jews. I remember particularly during the time of Bernie Madoff that many of the news articles called him a Jewish financier. And unfortunately, that just gave fuel to the fire of those who would say that Jews are so and so with regard to business and finance and so on. Just gave more fuel to that caricature. And many of us thought, had this been somebody who wasn't Jewish, would they have said an Episcopalian financier or a Catholic financier or a Muslim financier? But the fact that he was Jewish was pretty prominent in the news reports that came out at the time. So, Kol Yehudim Aravim Zeh Lezeh. Every Jew is responsible one for the other, and that's whether we have done something great or whether we have done something not so great. So today I want to talk about the great. There's a pharmaceutical company by the name of Moderna here I believe in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but the chief medical officer is an Israeli Jew. His name is Tal Zaks, and He moved to America. Let me just find a little bit of information so that I don't give you uh, the wrong information. He is the chief medical officer, and he is um, one of the individuals who is responsible for the creation of what is going to be a lifesaver for hundreds of millions of people, and that is a vaccine for COVID-19. And there are two that are out there right now, one that comes from Pfizer and this one from Moderna. And this gentleman moved from Israel a number of years ago because he felt that he might have more of an opportunity to do the kind of research that he wanted to do in these RNA um, vaccines. He was further motivated. His mother lives in Israel. She's in her 80s. She lives in Ranana, and he has been unable to see her since before Pesach because of the COVID virus. And so he was highly motivated. And it looks as if this, as I mentioned, one of the two vaccines, uh, which he spearheaded the development of, is going to be incredible for us to guard against this horrible, horrible virus, and that they expect the first doses to be given probably sometime in December and January, and those doses will go to um, frontline essential employees, and that could include everybody from nurses and physicians to CNAs to people who work in grocery stores who have to deal with the public 8 hours a day and so on. The elderly, those who are over 65, those with pre-existing conditions. Apparently, the promise of this particular vaccine is, or one of the elements of this vaccine that's so critical is that although it needs to be kept at low temperatures, it isn't so low that the manufacturer would need to, or pharmacies and doctors' offices would not need to have these net sub-zero refrigeration systems that evidently this does keep at a cold temperature, but not as cold as the Pfizer drug. And it can also be maintained for up to 30 days in just a regular refrigerator, whereas the Pfizer vaccine has to be kept, can only be kept for 5 days. So, which could possibly contribute to waste. Although I think the problem we're going to have with the vaccine is that it goes too quickly. So, it is 94.5% effective. They have completed their phase 3 trials, and it looks very, very, very promising. So, yay for Jews who are creating new things. And in fact, if you haven't had an opportunity to read the book Startup Nation, it's a fabulous book. It's a book about Israel and the incredible number of startup companies that come out of that little teeny tiny country. And I believe the year in which the book was written, which is probably about 5 to 8 years ago, somewhere around that, there were 70,000 new patents in the state of Israel, and that was equivalent to, that was more than all of the patents that had been applied for in all of the surrounding Arab nations together. So, you know, from microchips to cell phones to computers to you name it, Jews are always in the forefront. So I thought it would be fun to look at some other Jewish precedents, some other Jewish firsts. And I have this wonderful book called The Jewish Book of Lists, which I like to look at because it gives me a great sense of pride in being Jewish. Sorry if I'm being ethnocentric right now, but I think as a rabbi, it's my job to be a cheerleader for Judaism and for Jews, and also a critic when the time is right. So the book begins with this paragraph, which I just want to read quickly, and then we'll go into some of these firsts. The debate rages on. Were the Jews the first to introduce God to the world? If so, that gift was only the first in an impressive list of Jewish firsts. If not, we've more than made up for it in the last 200 years in America alone. Jewish American firsts effectively highlight the vast social and commercial interests for which American Jews have shared their skills and fortitude. It also gives us more specific evidence of where to place our pride. After all, while we may never know for certain whether Abraham was really the first person to figure out there was something more powerful than a stone statue, we know for darn sure that Levi Strauss came out with the first real pair of blue jeans. Many Jewish American firsts can be attributed to age-old Judaic traditions of charity, education, self-improvement, enterprise, and even chutzpah. All told, they may not compare with the introduction of God, but then again, after that, almost everything looks like a footnote. So here are some of the firsts in the United States. The first department store was opened in Vincennes, Indiana in 1842. And I'm going to give you a second to guess who opened that first department store in Vincennes, Indiana in 1842. Very famous last name. It was opened by Adam Gimbel. And I'm sure you know the name Gimbel because Gimbels and Macy's became synonymous with wonderful, wonderful department stores, starting in Indiana and then moving on to New York, along with Saks and Lord & Taylor and so on and so forth. The first drugstore was opened in Charleston, South Carolina in 1864 by Dr. David DeLeon. Now, it's very interesting to note that some of these firsts came about specifically because Jews were not permitted certain types of vocations. And this dates back certainly long before the founding of the United States of America. If you ever saw the play The Merchant of Venice, you know that the main character, Shylock, is a moneylender, and he's a Jew. And why were Jews moneylenders? Because Christians were not permitted to lend money for interest. And so that occupation, which was looked down upon, was relegated to Jews. Similarly, Jews were not permitted to join guilds. So they couldn't be silversmiths, and they couldn't be goldsmiths, and they couldn't be blacksmiths. They were not permitted to own land more than a small parcel on which they could live and grow whatever crops they needed just for themselves. But they couldn't be farmers, so they couldn't sell those crops to the general community and make their livelihood doing that. So the jobs available, the different types of careers and employment available for Jews was very limited. And it was limited by the Gentile populations that lived around them and within which the Jews lived. And so we see in some of these towns, particularly out west in California and in Oregon, and in Oklahoma and some of these other states, that the Jews came as people who provided services to the Gentile community that was living there. When I was a student rabbi, I served a pulpit in Williamson, Williamson, West Virginia, which was the town where the Hatfields and the McCoys lived. And when you drive through town, you can still see painted on the sides of these very old stores, Cohn's Dry Goods and Goodman's Pharmacy and things of that nature, because the Jews came as peddlers. And in West Virginia, of course, it was the coal mining industry. I also served a congregation as a student rabbi in Seminole, Oklahoma. And that's, of course, where the oil and gas industry was very prolific. And so Jews came to these communities to provide goods and services for the people in the towns who were participating in earning their livelihoods in the more lucrative professions. But they were also able to create very nice lives for themselves. So that's why we see this first department store by a Jew, the first drugstore opened by a Jew in Charleston, South Carolina. The first professional Jewish baseball player, no, it wasn't Sandy Koufax, was Lipman Pike. He was paid $20 a week in 1866 by the Philadelphia Athletics. So, although Jews were discriminated against, there were a handful who played in professional sports. And my rabbi of blessed memory, Rabbi Mark Shapiro, as well as the religious educators in my congregation in Chicago, used to do a trip once a year with the third graders who were studying Jewish life cycle. And they would go to the old B'nai Jehoshua cemetery, where many of the original members of the synagogue were buried. And they would do this really fascinating tour of the cemetery and find headstones of Jews who were actually famous. And I don't remember his name, but there was a Jewish boxer buried in that cemetery who kind of had a claim to fame. So some of these vocations were open to Jews, but not all. So we have our first professional baseball player, Lipman Pike, paid $20 a week in 1866 by the Philadelphia Athletics. And that was probably a pretty darn good salary in 1866. The first Jewish doctor to perform, actually the first doctor to perform an appendectomy in the United States was Simon Baruch, and that was in the 1870s. So this is not just the first Jewish doctor, this is the first doctor to perform an appendectomy in the United States, was a Jewish doctor. The first denim jeans to be made and sold in America were the product of a company founded by Levi Strauss. Strauss and a partner in the venture, Jacob Davis, received a patent for the riveted waist overalls in 1873. So that's a long time ago, 1873. We're talking about what, 150 years ago? Yeah, almost 150 years ago. So, and who'd have thunk that Levi's are, still made in America. One of the few clothing products that we can see are still made here, and there is probably not a household in the world, or let's say probably 95% of the households in the world have a pair of blue jeans somewhere in that house. And it's all due to Levi Strauss. who made those coveralls with the rivets in 1873. Okay. So here's an interesting tidbit. We all know that blue jeans or Levi jeans have the rivets, and if you look online, you can actually go and see the patent that Levi Strauss and Jacob Davis were given for those rivets. And why the rivets? Well, the rivets were strategically placed in the corners and made the pockets almost impervious to being ripped because they held them in place so strongly. And if you look at the logo on the rivets, you will see two horses, and the horses are pulling in different directions. And that logo was chosen to show that even horses couldn't pull these pockets apart because they were riveted so tightly. So probably more information than you ever thought you'd want to learn about Levi's jeans, but there it is. Okay. The first free kindergarten class in America was established in 1877 by Felix Adler. The first free kindergarten class. So it sounds like up until that point, perhaps that grade was only available to those who could afford to pay a tutor or a teacher. The first doctor to use cocaine as an anesthetic was eye surgeon Carl Kohler, and that was in 1884. Carl Kohler in 1884. The first person to form a collegiate women's basketball team, ushering in a new era in sports in 1901. Unbelievable, that's a long time ago. Was Senda Berenson, physical education director at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. And Smith was, and I believe still is, an all-women's school. And there's a male school that also that is their male counterpart. Smith is part of a consortium known as the Seven Sisters, which are these very elite women's colleges on the Eastern Seaboard. And it was chartered in 1871. So it wasn't much later than that this women's basketball team was formed in 1901 by a Jewish woman. The first American to win the Nobel Prize in Physics was Albert A. Michelson, and that was in 1907, and he received the honor for his discovery of accurate methods of measuring the speed of light. Wow. That's pretty incredible. I have no way of knowing for certain, but I imagine that being able to accurately measure the speed of light has had an impact on every aspect of science, technology, medicine that one could think of. And so it's pretty incredible to think that that was a Jewish man, Albert A. Michelson. The first national mail order catalog was developed and put into use in 1908 by Julius Rosenwald, and he was the co-founder of a company that is synonymous with catalog mail order. And that, of course, is Sears Roebuck Company. Sadly, Sears has fallen on very hard times, and so many Sears stores. I honestly don't even know if Sears is still in business, but I do know that many, many of the stores have been closed. The first shopping cart was developed by Murray Candeeb's Canco Enterprises in the 1940s. As founder and president of King's Department Stores, Candib also pioneered self-service discount stores and centralized checkout. Pretty amazing. So think about Murray every time you go to the grocery store or another store once the COVID virus is over and you can go back to the stores, every time you use a cart. The first American musician to perform in the Soviet Union after World War II was violinist, no, not Henny Youngman, not Yitzhak Perlman, he would have been too young, Yehudi Menuhin, and that was in 1945, the first American musician to perform in the Soviet Union after World War II. So again, it was still the Soviet Union. It was not Russia at that time. The Soviet Union had not fallen and wouldn't fall for a number of decades yet. So that was quite an achievement. The Philadelphia Orchestra practiced the first symphonic concert shown on American TV in 1948 under the direction of conductor Eugene Ormandy. That would be a really amazing video to try to find and watch. That was the first symphonic concert shown on American TV. The first practical birth control pill was developed in the 1950s by Dr. Gregory Goodwin Pincus with his collaborator, Dr. M.C. Chiang. And of course, the development of the birth control pill revolutionized family planning and has had an enormous impact on our society as well as others throughout the world. The American TV news correspondent, the first American TV news correspondent to have official Soviet permission to work in the USSR was Irving R. Levine of NBC, who in the late 1950s personally appealed to Nikita Khrushchev after covering a visit by American agriculturalists. And I can still picture Irving R. Levine's face. He had a beautifully characteristic face. It was great. The first commissioner of cultural affairs for New York City was film producer and writer Dor Shari, appointed in 1970. The first American symphony orchestra to perform in China, the Philadelphia Orchestra, did so in 1973 under the direction of Eugene Ormandy. That is amazing that in this list of 19 American firsts, Jews who were first in America to do this, Eugene Ormandy conducted the first symphonic concert shown on American TV and the first symphony orchestra to perform in China. The first American woman to win a Nobel Prize in Science was Rosalind S. Yalow, who in 1977 received the honor for her development of radioimmunoassays of peptide hormones, having to do with procedures to measure substances in blood and other body fluids. And in 1977, I was graduating from college, and I remember when Rosalind S. Yalow received the Nobel Prize in Science. It was a remarkable achievement. And the first American to cast a vote from outer space, speaking of votes being cast from outer space, but the very first American to cast a vote from outer space was Jewish, and he was Jewish astronaut David Wolf aboard the Russian space station Mir in November of 1997, excuse me. Now, this book was written in 1998, and I would believe that since then, in the last 22 years, almost 23 years, that there have been many, many more firsts here in the United States that were done by American Jews. And so today I bring you some pride in being a landsman, in being a member of that tribe. And I hope you found this interesting, and I hope that that you found some pride also in these Jewish American firsts. Lehitraot. I hope to see you next time on Hi There with Rabbi Leah. And for now, bye bye.